Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, it's Joshua here. 10 o'clock sharp, according to Windows 7. So let's start this up. I see a large number of attendees, so this is great. This series this is our second in a series of webinars. Our goal is to educate. Today the goal and the topic is about benchmarking site speed. As the president of Strangeloop, I am not so disconnected that I don't get to sit through a number of sales meetings. I get to talk to a lot of customers, and I constantly see the same types of reports, the same types of benchmarking reports. I want to show you, and the goal today is to really show you a different approach here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by going through a PowerPoint presentation. Then I'm going to flip off to a test tool that I'm going to use to benchmark the site speed. I've just picked actually one of our customers to use as an example here. I didn't want to embarrass someone that wasn't our customer. Now this is a customer that isn't in production yet, so you can see their site before and hopefully after. Let's get going. We've got about half an hour. I encourage questions at any point. So you will be familiar with graphs like this. I've just pulled up graphs from two companies that you'll probably be familiar with. You're getting graphs, I would imagine you're probably getting graphs that show you site performance. So here's an example of site performance. This is being measured by a number of agents around the world, and it's telling me that my site is loading in between 1.2 and 1.6 seconds. Another example on the same site, here we go. You'll see at the bottom here under nodes from Los Angeles, Miami, Atlanta, New York, and Seattle. And it's telling me that my site's loading between 1.8 and 2.7 seconds. This is a world that you probably are familiar with, or you're the one who's in charge of this, and or products like this. And then you get feedback from the real world, and I'm constantly meeting with executives who say, you know, these are the reports I get on a daily basis, and yet I know that my site doesn't load like that. My site takes me from home 10 seconds. Most of my users, 15 seconds. My international users, for example. There's a disconnect between this and what I think my universe is seeing. So my goal today is to try to benchmark your site using metrics that we believe mirror as closely to the real world as possible, and empower you to create a presentation so that you can share it with your team. A presentation that hopefully will elicit some conversation, some feedback, some sparks of interest. That's the goal. So let's keep going here. And again, I encourage you to ask questions. I see that, John, you asked a question, and I'm going to come back to that. So keep asking them. Don't feel like because I'm not answering them in the beginning, I will not answer them. And if they're topical, I will answer. And I am juggling chat programs and the PowerPoint, so please bear with me as we go through this. There are a lot of tools to measure performance, different types of performance. This is a very confusing world. I want to try to simplify it. If you do want to understand all of the different pieces of this world, there's a great book written by friends of mine, Alistair and Sean, that I'd recommend if you really want to dig into it. If you are a hardcore metrics person, this session probably isn't for you. We're going to try to do metrics and, again, a presentation that you can share with the team. I want to talk about the preparation. So the preparation in order to create this, and I'm going to do it in front of you, so you'll see what's involved in every step. I need to find two direct competitors. So I'm going to use the example of Petco.com, the large pet supply shop. I need to find two direct competitors. I've done that. It's easy in my space. I need to find 3 pages that match. So in this case, I'm going to go to the home page. I'm going to take a dogs page and a feeders and water bowls, which is a funny section. I own a dog. I'm a proud owner of a very large standard poodle. So I happened to go there because we're looking for a new water bowl. So it was very personally driven. And then you need to determine your target customers, or for the purpose of this, target customers' geographical location, browser preference, and connection speed. Again, this is very high level. We're making guesses here. In the second level of preparation is you've got to fill in a table like this. My competitors here, Petco, PetSmart, and Dr. F&S, Foster's and Smith. I've gone out, before this and collected the links for the homepage, the dog homepage, and the bowls and feeders page. Now, you might be in an industry, and funny, Miriam got to that question before I did. You might be in an industry where you can't find as close, you're not in an e-commerce space where you're serving what's essentially a commodity product. So you have to use your intuition here. I find it very helpful to galvanize interest in something like this, to find competitors that you're talking about all the time, even if they're, internally as a company, even if they're not directly competitive. But that's a good question. And yes, you won't always find an example that's this beautiful from they have exactly the same pages. So let's keep going here. Next step is I'm going to pick a browser, a location, and a network connection. Now, the reason I specify all of these is because often this is overlooked. What's usually happening in the test, for example, that I showed you up top, you're not using a real browser, or it's a simulated browser. For the purposes of this test, and I think really getting insight into performance, you're going to want to pick a tool. I've chosen one here, but there are many. There are a number to choose from. You're going to want to pick a tool which uses a real browser. You're going to want to pick a location which is not your office, because you probably don't represent a normal user. In this case, I've picked an East Coast location in Dulles, Virginia, and a network connection that mimics your users. If you look at a Petco user base, IE7 and DSL show up often. You can get most of this information from your Google Analytics or Omniture account if you don't already know it. Again, simple preparation. The goal here is to create a piece that people can talk about. We then need to start preparing our tests. I'm going to choose web page test for now. So I'm going to go off and start preparing my tests. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to come back to my links here, and I'm going to open webpagetest.com .org. WebPageTest is a tool that is an open source tool. Originally came out of AOL, and what I really like about it is it mimics real browsers and different locations. So the first thing you'll do when you come to WebPageTest is you'll see a page like this. We at Strangeloop are a sponsor, and what sponsorship means is we host locations. If you look at the location list, there are locations all over the world that you can test from. These are data centers that are sitting behind bandwidth simulators so that you can attempt to mimic the real world. Gavin, that is a good question about the network stuff, and I'm going to come back to that one. Gavin's asking about network connection and how to simulate it. Again, if for the simplest terms, this site does it all for you, which I really like. I'm going to pick Dulles, Virginia, which is this location here. In North America, there's San Jose, there's Chicago, New York. We've got a location in Sao Paulo, a number of Europe. There's a location in Australia, New Zealand, and in mainland China. And it's pretty fun to play with the mainland China location. You can see what this great firewall does for you. So in its simplest form, you come in, you type in a URL, you pick your location, and you can click Start. That's not what I'm going to do for the purposes of this test. What I'm going to do for the purposes of this test is choose the other field, the other tab here, which is visual comparison. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start going from my PowerPoint. I'm just going to do this once. This is like a pet cooking show. I've obviously cooked it, so you don't have to watch all of this. And I'm going to put in my URL and a label. And I'm just going to add all three of these URLs to that test. What's happening when I do this is it's going to tell the system to take to do tests from Dulles, Virginia, over IE7, over a DSL line for all three of those sites, and then give me a visual comparison. We'll come back to the visual comparison and take a look at that. I think it's one of the most, I find it the most compelling, or one of the most compelling things about this type of test and how to get interest in your organization. So what I've done is I put three labels based on the homework that I did collecting my URLs. I've added the URLs here, and I'm going to click Start Test. So what I've done is I've authorized the system. I've told the system, go do tests on Petco, PetSmart, Dr. Foster and Smith on the home pages, and come back and report on that. What I would then do is I would do that same exercise for the dog homepage and the bowls and feeders page. Both of those tasks I would undertake. That's basically the homework you need to do here. There are a few other things that we'll get into, but from that, I think we can create a compelling report. So let me show you what that report looks like, and I'm going to come back and continue to sort of go back and forth between the report and the test so you can see where I got the information, where it came out of. First thing I'm going to do, and what I always start these presentations with and what I encourage you to do, is to start with a film. After that test is run, I'll come back and show you exactly how we do the film and how we get that out. It's really simple. What you'll see here on the film is I've slowed it down. I've got my home page if I'm Petco, PetSmart in the middle, Dr. Foster, and I guess ampersands don't work, and Sons. This is the time that it's taking from the customer's perspective. 2.6, 2.5 seconds, 2.5, 2.6 seconds, PetSmart's running, and up, that's my direct competitor. Let's wait. My site starts coming up at around 5. It's not fully interactive until 6, 7, and Dr. Foster's and Smith is in the same boat. So what I find is when I put this in front of an executive at an organization, they'll look at this. PetSmart's talked about all the time if I'm Petco. The sites, everyone's looking at it, and the fact that I am not as fast or even close to as fast is a real concern for me as an organization. Let's just watch that quickly again, just so you can get a feel for it. What I want to talk about after is what I try to include in these presentations and in terms of benchmarking your site speed. And again, you'll see it's about benchmarking your site speed as well as trying to start the conversation around acceleration, is how important this gap is. So this gap between 3 seconds, or really about 2.5 to even start rendering, and the 4.5 that I see on my site if I'm Petco, or the 5.5 that I see on Dr. Foster's and Smith, has a direct impact on your bottom line. We know, or we've started to be able to predict, and there's very good science behind this, what your conversion rate fall off is depending on your site speed. My site speed, my site loads in about 8 seconds. That's my red star, and the best site in my industry loads at about 2.5, 2.9 seconds. What I can infer just right off the top is that probably means that they're getting a 15% better conversion rate from those users that are landing on that page. 15%. So let's put that into perspective. 15%. I was at an organization, one of our customers, Travelocity, where they celebrate 0.5, 0.2% improvements in conversion. The fact that our studies and others that collaborate this tell us that makes such a significant performance difference, that performance difference makes such a significant conversion difference is really important. Good question, Mike. Mike asked a question about other studies on this, and I'm going to get to that in my next slide. We know that performance matters, and I don't want to spend too much time here talking about that topic, but I think that you should be looking at these slides and all of the information that's out there about the industry, about the performance facts. The fact is, we now know categorically for both large and small companies that performance makes a significant difference. Let me talk about, and I think this is an important, again, when you think about benchmarking your site speed, I find that organizations are just so narrowly focused on the site, the speed, the site, the speed, that I feel a benchmark is not appropriate without industry benchmarks as well as information about what other sites do. So here's an interesting graph that we've started to put together based on all of the available public research, the conversion rate increase based on how much performance they got. So we know the difference, for example, between PetSmart and Petco is 2, 3, 4 seconds. 3-second performance differences are starting to line up. Here's an example where Bing did 2 seconds faster and they got about 5% better for conversion. Here's an example of Amazon, 1 second faster, 10% better conversion. So you can start pinpointing where you're at and where the performance difference is and start telling a compelling business case for the organization. If we are 2 seconds slower than our competitors and we improve by 2 seconds, you sort of get a general sense for what kind of conversion rate increases you should expect, assuming your site, in this case, is an e-commerce site, which isn't always the case, obviously. The next step in benchmarking your site speed is to try to get a sense for industry benchmarks. What I've pulled here are the retail benchmarks for last, quote-unquote, last mile testing, meaning from a user's perspective. The average site takes 10 seconds. On a mobile device, the average mobile site in the retail space takes 6. You might find it difficult to find benchmarks. Greg, these benchmarks are taken from Gomez's benchmarking initiative. There are others that are industry-wide. It's helpful, I find, to get a sense for the benchmarks and the competition. And the reason is because the benchmark, let's remember here, the average is 10.4. When I look at my site, and again, I've chosen IE7 Dulles, Virginia over DSL, my site at Petco takes 8.6 seconds. So if I didn't have the industry data and my competitive data as part of this benchmarking exercise, I actually wouldn't have a view. I might just sit here and think, wow, 8.6 seconds is great. I've broken this into 2 times. And we are starting to find, based on our research and our customers' experience, that there are 2 really important times. There actually are 3, but I want to focus on 2 for the purposes of this session. The first time that's really important is when is the time to display. When does that page start showing me as a user that something's happening, some recognition? The home page starts to display at 4.5 seconds. And when is it, here, the time to interact? Meaning, when is the site ready, loaded, and ready for me to do action? Obviously, between these times, some sites are ready for action and some aren't. My home page on Petco, 4.5 seconds time to start displaying, 8.6 seconds time to interact. Say dog home page and the dog bowls and feeders page is around the same time to start and slightly longer. I want to come back to the web page test to show you where I got all the information for this slide. So let me come here, and these tests are still running. I'll go to a few cooked ones. What you'll see is there's this great feature here which gets me into the test history. So I'll come here and I'll open that tab, and you'll see that I've done a lot of tests over the last few days. Let's take a look at my Petco test from Dulles, Virginia, over IE7, over DSL for Petco.com. That's where I got that first benchmark from. What happens when you pull up the tests, it gives you some really handy scores in terms of how the site's ranking based on some key initiatives that are key performance scores, as well as shows me my load time and my start render time. Those are the 2 numbers that I'm transcribing back into the PowerPoint. 4.5 seconds to start to render, 8.7, 8.8 seconds to fully load. We have a number of sessions that go into other information around this, and I'll get to that after, where we start analyzing waterfalls. In fact, I believe that's our next webinar, where we come and we actually look at these waterfalls. This is what's actually happening from you on the browser. The green is when it starts to load. The blue is when it's fully loaded. And we're going to start going through these and helping people decipher exactly what's happening. That's obviously not the point here. It is helpful, however. You'll see a number of options: film strip view and watch video. I find the film strip view incredibly compelling because this shows me over time exactly what's happening at any time period, and I can have a lot of granularity here. Let's say I want to go to, large size thumbnail pictures, which is the size of this, and an interval of, 0.1. So I can see what's happening at every 100 milliseconds, exactly what's loading, and the what's loading and the order of it. So let's just get to when this starts, 4.4 seconds. That's what the user first sees. Really important to, again, I benchmark it in the PowerPoint, and I also want to highlight it here, both in this view as well as the ability to create a video. So here I can also create a video from that, where it will then compile that into a video. This isn't the comparison video that we saw before. This would just be a video of this individual page. I'll show you what that looks like. Again, I find videos incredibly compelling from the perspective of influencing and talking about performance. When I show this to a user, which is my Petco homepage loading, or a prospect or someone interested in performance, they get it. They just get it. Now, on its own, as I say, without industry benchmarks and other company benchmarks, your competitor benchmarks, it doesn't mean very much. But again, very, very important. My tests are still happening. There seems to be a bit of a backlog on web page test, and again, it's an open source service, and it does one at a time. So those are still going to run. I'm going to come back to the presentation here because I want to talk about, so I did that exercise where I put in all of these pages into web page test. I then transcribed the numbers that showed up in each page. This job is pretty simple. I then looked at my competitors, and the first thing I looked at is how long does it take for a page to display. So my site, Petco, if I'm Petco, 4.5 seconds. PetSmart's homepage in 2.2. The dog's homepage in 4.4 versus 3.8. 4.1 versus 3.8. I highlighted in green the winners. So if I'm trying to get a compelling case to benchmark my site's performance, One of the things I want to look at is time to display. And this is where that film strip view, when you compare tests, is really compelling. You can see, they're coming up somewhere around here, and I'm coming up somewhere around there, and that 1 second is a huge, huge differentiator. Let's go take a look at what that view looks like. So here we go. This is actually that view. What happens once you've completed the test, they're all complete now, it brings you into this view here, where you could start seeing the time up top. It's funny, it doesn't show up very well in Chrome, but it does in IE. So all of you IE users will have a much better experience than I will in this case. And you can start seeing where things show up. So 2.5 seconds, I'm not showing up, but PetSmart is. I don't show up till all the way over here when PetSmart's already fully loaded. This is a really important part of benchmarking your site speed, which is the time to start. Question from Larry. Larry's question is around how accurate this is, how real world it is. Lenny, we use this extensively. We use this extensively. We find that this is a tool that we have benchmarked against our own performance. Obviously, it's a synthetic manipulation of your network. It's not a real computer. So if you do have a real computer in a real home, it's ideal. That's actually how we do our testing internally. But we feel pretty comfortable about the value of the tool and the predictability of it, so to say. So we've come here and we've talked about first view, or when I can start interacting. You can see right now that if I'm the owner of Petco, I'm actually not particularly excited about where I rank versus my competitor. Now let's look at the time to interact. When is the page ready to interact? Same thing. I did all of these tests in web page test. I then just transcribed the numbers back into this PowerPoint. You can see that against my two main competitors, my pages are slower in every case. This creates, I think, when you match it with the performance, a very compelling story around investing in performance and ideally a benchmark. You can see these numbers are incredibly different than the numbers that I might have been getting spewed to me in a report daily. I would put a lot of stock into these numbers. If your site's coming, if you're being told that your site's loaded in 1.8 seconds, and you know in your heart of hearts that it's probably 9 or 10, you need tools that mimic your guess much more than what a number might be telling you on a graph. So this is my time to interact numbers. If we keep going here, there are a number of other things that you can look at and things that might or might not be important. We have about 6 minutes left, so I'm going to go through a few of them, not all of them. One of the things that often comes up is a repeat view. So all of the tests that we've done right now are speaking to an empty cache. Basically, you've come to this page, essentially landed on there without ever having anything in your cache. You've never been to my site before. If you have, everything is out of cache. Let's take a look at the repeat view numbers. If you look just example at the home page, the repeat view here for Petco is 4.6, and Dr. Foster's and Smith is 2.6. This is really important because a lot of your users will be coming to pages where they've already had, for example, things in their cache. Let me show you where we get those numbers from. So if you actually dig into any individual test, and let me just go back to my test history here, and I'll show you what that looks like. Let's say, I'm going to go into my Dr. Foster's and Smith test. Actually, that one won't work because for the videos, it doesn't actually keep first and repeat view. You have to do a specific test yourself in order to do that. And I've done that here, where you'll see it will capture a first view and what they call a repeat view, which is essentially a warmed cache. You'll see this page is very, very different. For example, in the Dr. Foster and Smith case, 6 seconds to load if it's uncached, on a cold cache, and 1.6 seconds. Look at that waterfall compared to this one. That's a lot of resources. That's not a lot of resources. You have to also be looking at repeat views. Now, to just stimulate the conversation, I found that just talking about landing page views and the performance of landing page is good enough. Start at the top of the funnel, where you know that users bounce off your page, and the stats show how important conversion is. So I don't think you need to muddy the waters yet. If you do have a more sophisticated group, I would do a similar exercise to what we did here for, start render or, initial display and fully available, ready to interact for both first view and repeat view. And I would look across your customers and try to get, use the rule of thumb that about 50% of your views are going to be first views. And I know there's a lot of discrepancy about that number. We're actually in the process right now of doing more research around that because this is affected by not only has your user been to your site before, but also really importantly, is that user still have that stuff in cache? Other things you might start, for example, you might change browsers. All the tests we did were with IE7. If I do a test with IE8, what do my numbers look like? Well, what's interesting about my numbers is actually my numbers here at Petco don't change very much. Remember I was about 8.1 now to 8.8, but PetSmart and Dr. Foster's and Smith do. So the browser also changes things. So again, you can start taking this and going in a number of directions. Different browsers, different locations, first view or repeat view, different connection settings. Again, you can certainly get more sophisticated, but the goal here is to try to benchmark your site in a way that end users can see the real results. I'm going to just stop here and answer 3 of the questions that I have in front of me, and it's looking like I'm not going to get to all of your questions, so I apologize in advance. I certainly will answer them all. I'm going to stay on after for anyone who has other questions, but I'm going to continue to answer them. Question from Elena about what other tools can be used other than web page test? That's a great question. You can see I'm personally biased towards web page test. There are a number of other things you could do. You can use a desktop-based tool if you are on a browser and a geographical location and a network that simulates what your users are on. I certainly wouldn't advise this from the office, but one thing that I use a lot is a tool here called that I actually happen to have fired up for a totally different reason, HTTP Watch. So HTTP Watch I find is a great tool where you actually download it and it shows you your experience from where you are. Again, my caution on that, as always, is you don't know. So basically you click record and you just start navigating through pages and it will score exactly what I'm seeing. Now, what's interesting about this, look at what Petco scores. I have just really great internet connection here in my office. So this, again, would be a terrible place to judge performance by. I just wrote a blog on my blog about how sometimes we're, as performance experts, not the best judge of our performance. And I actually find one of the reasons is because we all are sitting on super fast computers behind great networks. So HTTP Watch is a good product. There are some really good companies out there from Webmetrics and others in that space that also will give you some insight into this. Again, make sure that the 3 big questions of real browser, a location that's where your users are, and bandwidth that matches your users are answered before you take any of those tests from companies like Webmetrics into consideration. But they're a good example, and there are a number of others. But those are sort of, you can do it at the open source world, like web page tests. We're using real browsers and real locations. You can go to one of the test companies like Webmetrics. You could look at HTTP Watch and other things of that nature. I'm going to come back to the presentation and just sit on this slide where you can see our upcoming webinars and answer some other questions. So Chad has a question about, this is a point in time, I'm paraphrasing here, but you're taking tests which are a point in time, and I need to see, we know performance varies by time and date and server throughput, and you're absolutely right. So one of the things that, I encourage customers to do when they're looking at this is to sort of look across 3 or 4 time periods to do tests. Again, this is only sampling, and one of the values of the tests we saw earlier is there this repeat thing that you can set up. There is an example of something that's been done by one of our customers at Travelocity where they've basically allowed us to automate the testing of the web page tests. I'm going to just ad hoc here and go see if I can find it. Here is an example of where that's happening. They basically have set up a site where you can go through, set up a test. So basically say, I want to test the home page and run a number of tests through that system. So this is a really good example of where you can sort of see what that looks like and what, I'm going to see if I can, oh, here we go. Sorry, I'm covered by my web page testing. So let's graph one of these. So here's an example of each of these are individual web page tests, which I can go and look at the results on, and they're graphing all of the times that we care about. Time to first byte, start render, dock time. This is a great tool. It's been open sourced, and I can, if you're interested, feel free to email me. But this is a way to sort of answer that question that was just asked. We're almost out of time. It is already 10:30. Wow, time flies when we're having fun. I'm going to just stay on the line and answer a few additional questions. I encourage you to come to some of our other sessions. We're going to be talking about Waterfalls 101 in a couple weeks. We're also going to be talking about common performance problems and action plans for fixing your site performance. I will get back to every single one of you on your questions. There's 14 outstanding questions that I haven't answered. I'm going to try to get through as many as I can after. And I really appreciate you attending. I hope this was valuable. Send feedback. And you know, I spend a lot of time blogging and thinking about this performance space. If you have any questions, feel free to email. I will take a 20-second pause so that you don't feel rude leaving while I'm in mid-sentence, and we will rejoin and start answering some of the other questions. Thank you, everyone. Much appreciated.